Few names in rock history carry the same weight as Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness, the man who defied death, addiction, and obscurity to become one of the most iconic figures in music. But even for someone as larger-than-life as Ozzy, time and trauma eventually took their toll. Among the most devastating chapters in his life was the failed spinal surgery that not only altered his physical condition, but also marked a turning point in his storied legacy. It all began in 2003 when Ozzy suffered a severe quad bike accident at his estate in England. The incident left him with multiple injuries, fractured vertebrae, a broken collarbone, and several broken ribs. He underwent emergency surgery and, incredibly, made a strong recovery. For years, he pressed on, touring and performing with the energy that defied his age and ailments. But the accident had planted a seed of damage that would continue to grow silently. In 2019, a seemingly minor fall at home exacerbated the old injuries from the quad bike accident. The fall dislodged metal rods implanted in his spine, triggering immense pain and neurological issues. Ozzy's health took a sharp turn for the worse, and he was forced to cancel tour dates, something he had rarely done throughout his decades-long career. After postponing his farewell tour, he underwent spinal surgery to try and correct the damage. But the surgery didn't go as planned. The procedure, which was hoped to bring relief, instead left him in constant agony. Ozzy openly described the aftermath as one of the most brutal periods of his life. His balance deteriorated, he lost mobility, and walking even short distances became a challenge. He began using a cane and required assistance to move around. The very thing that was supposed to save his ability to perform had instead become a burden he could not shake. More than just physical pain, the failed surgery hit Ozzy emotionally and psychologically. For a man whose identity was wrapped up in movement, strutting across stages, leaping into mosh pits, and commanding crowds with his feral energy, this new version of himself was disorienting. He admitted to slipping into bouts of depression, confessing in interviews that he felt like a shadow of who he used to be. The fear of being seen as weak or past his prime haunted him. Even as fans around the world rallied behind him with unshakable loyalty. Despite his suffering, Ozzy continued to record music. His albums Ordinary Man, 2020, and Patient Number 9, 2022, became cathartic outlets. Raw, dark, and reflective, they were a window into the mind of a man grappling with mortality, regret, and resilience. In songs like Under the Graveyard, Ozzy didn't shy away from themes of despair and fading strength. It was not just art, it was confession. Throughout this ordeal, Ozzy's family, especially his wife Sharon, stood by him, acting as caregivers, advocates, and emotional pillars. Yet even Sharon admitted in interviews how difficult it was to watch the man she loved and revered decline in such a painful and prolonged way. The Osbournes, who had once invited the world into their chaotic and hilarious home on reality TV, were now living a quieter and more solemn battle behind closed doors. In 2023, after a series of treatments, therapies, and consultations with multiple doctors, Ozzy made the heartbreaking decision to step away from touring altogether. It was an announcement that stunned the rock world. The man who had lived 1,000 lives on the road was now grounded by a spine that refused to heal. "My singing voice is fine," he told fans, "but my body is telling me something else." The failed spinal surgery had claimed something more than his mobility. It had taken a piece of his identity. Yet in true Osbourne fashion, even amid pain, Ozzy refused to fade into silence. He continued to give interviews, engage with fans, and work on music when he could. He joked about death, made light of his condition, and remained the darkly humorous force the world had come to love. His defiance, even in the face of physical defeat, became its own kind of power. The failed spinal surgery did not define Ozzy Osbourne's legacy, but it did reveal the human behind the myth. It reminded the world that even legends bleed, break, and age. In his pain, Ozzy allowed fans to see the vulnerability beneath the spectacle, and in doing so, he became even more revered, not just as a rock god, but as a survivor. For over 4 decades, Sharon Osbourne was more than Ozzy Osbourne's wife. She was his manager, his protector, his caretaker, his business partner, and perhaps most heartbreakingly, his unwavering source of strength. Together, they weathered storms that would have shattered most couples, substance abuse, near-death experiences, public scandals, family struggles, and the crushing pressure of fame. But even the most unbreakable bonds can be strained, and Ozzy's betrayal of Sharon became a wound that neither time nor fame could easily mend. The world first learned of Ozzy's infidelity in 2016 when rumors surfaced about an affair with a hairstylist. At first, it seemed like tabloid noise, yet another story in the long saga of rockstar drama. But Sharon confirmed it. With tearful candor, she stepped onto the set of The Talk, the daytime show she co-hosted, and announced that her marriage was in crisis. After more than 33 years of marriage, she had kicked Ozzy out of the house. The news sent shockwaves through the entertainment world. This wasn't just a scandal, it was a betrayal of a woman who had literally saved Ozzy's life. It was Sharon who had picked him up after he was fired from Black Sabbath in the late 70s. It was Sharon who had discovered his solo potential, built a career for him from the ground up, booked tours, managed crises, and fought off predatory business associates. She had stood by him through every relapse, every arrest, and every tour injury. And Ozzy knew it. In a rare moment of naked vulnerability, he later admitted that his betrayal wasn't a spur-of-the-moment mistake. It was a pattern. He confessed to having multiple affairs over the years, referring to himself as an idiot and ashamed. But his shame did little to erase the damage. Sharon had always known about his struggles with addiction, but cheating struck at something far more personal. It wasn't the illness this time. It was a choice. For Sharon, the affair wasn't just about sex or another woman. It was about trust. You can't take a knife and just stab someone in the heart and think it's okay because you're high, she said in an interview. Her anger wasn't loud or performative. It was exhausted. After decades of sacrifice, she was forced to reevaluate everything she had fought for. Their children, especially Kelly and Jack, were caught in the emotional crossfire. As adults, they had grown up seeing their parents' fiery love, their famous fights, their tenderness beneath the chaos. Seeing their mother in pain, betrayed by the man they all idolized, changed the family dynamic. Ozzy had fractured not just his marriage, but the delicate system of love and loyalty that had kept their family standing. And yet, despite it all, Sharon didn't walk away entirely. In an astonishing act of forgiveness that many could never understand, Sharon eventually took Ozzy back. But it wasn't without consequence. She made it clear, this wasn't going to be a quiet reconciliation. He would have to earn her trust again, piece by painful piece. They renewed their vows, not as a media stunt, but as a symbol of starting over. Sharon later said, "I can't imagine my life without him, but it doesn't mean he gets a free pass." Ozzy himself was deeply remorseful. He often described the affair as the biggest mistake of his life, not just because he got caught, but because he hurt the only person who had ever truly believed in him. "She's my life," he said. "She's my heir." In interviews, his voice would crack when discussing it. The man who had howled in front of stadiums wept quietly in front of cameras when the topic came up. For Sharon, the betrayal was not something she could forget. But somehow she found a way to carry it with her, not as a badge of suffering, but as another chapter in an already complex, painful, yet strangely beautiful love story. Their journey since then has been quieter, more measured. Ozzy's declining health, including his Parkinson's diagnosis and his failed spinal surgery, brought them closer again in unexpected ways. Sharon shifted from betrayed wife to caregiver once more, though the scars of that betrayal never truly vanished. What remained was something rawer than romance, an understanding, a bond that had been tested at the highest stakes. In a world that often confuses drama with love and fame with forgiveness, the story of Ozzy's betrayal of Sharon stands out. It's a reminder that even icons fall, that love can hurt as much as it heals, and that forgiveness, when earned, is both a burden and a gift. Ozzy's affair didn't end his marriage, but it ended a version of it. What remained was something quieter, sadder, but also more human. Not the invincible love of fairy tales, but the messy, painful, sometimes infuriating endurance of two souls bound by history, tragedy, and an impossible depth of connection. For a man known as the Prince of Darkness, a metal icon, and the voice behind some of the most genre-defining songs in rock history, it's a truth that continues to surprise many. Ozzy Osbourne cannot play a musical instrument. Not the guitar, not the drums, not even the piano. He has occasionally dabbled, hitting a few notes on a keyboard or strumming a basic chord, but he has never truly learned to master any instrument. And yet, this musical limitation became one of his greatest paradoxes, and perhaps even one of his hidden strengths. In an industry that often worships technical virtuosity, Ozzy stood apart. He wasn't a shredder like Randy Rhoads or Zakk Wylde. He wasn't a musical architect like Tony Iommi. He didn't write intricate compositions in staff notation or tinker with mixing boards. But what he had was something more primal, more untamed, and in many ways more powerful. A voice that sounded like it had crawled out of the underworld, and a presence that could command an entire stadium without lifting a finger. From the earliest days of Black Sabbath, Ozzy's role was clear. He was the mouthpiece, the spiritual center, the conduit between the music and the audience. His haunting vocal tone, eerie vibrato, and raw, almost desperate delivery were unlike anything rock had seen. He wasn't just singing, he was summoning. And though he couldn't play an instrument, he could feel the music. He could hear a riff, understand its emotional weight, and instinctively know what kind of vocal line would elevate it. Tony Iommi, the legendary Black Sabbath guitarist, once said that Ozzy had a surprisingly intuitive sense for melody. He would hum vocal lines or make strange sounds to convey the mood of a song, and the band would build around that. While other musicians were busy with chords and keys, Ozzy focused entirely on atmosphere, on the feeling. He was the soul of the sound, not its skeleton. In a 2018 interview, Ozzy admitted with typical bluntness, "I can't play a bloody thing. I don't read or write music. I've just always had a knack for melody." That knack became the foundation of his career. It allowed him to collaborate with musicians who were technical masters, people like Rhoads, Wylde, and even his Sabbath bandmates, and trust them to create the framework while he colored it with his unique vocal presence. There were moments when his inability to play became a source of frustration. During the recording process, he often relied on humming melodies to explain his ideas, which could lead to confusion or misinterpretation. At times, he felt like an outsider in his own band, surrounded by players who spoke a musical language he couldn't fully understand. But even then, he found ways to assert his vision. He focused on storytelling, on mood, on making sure the music served the emotion he wanted to deliver. In a strange way, not knowing how to play an instrument forced Ozzy to lean harder into his natural instincts. He didn't overthink his phrasing or lose himself in scales or modes. He simply sang, with all the anguish, chaos, and wonder inside him. That unfiltered approach gave his music an authenticity that no amount of technical training could replace. Perhaps that's part of Ozzy's enduring appeal. He was never the polished genius behind the console. He was never the master of theory or the perfectionist in the studio. He was messy, intuitive, and deeply human. His limitations made him relatable, proof that you didn't have to be a prodigy to become a legend. You didn't have to play an instrument to move millions. Even today, fans often cite how Ozzy's voice could make a lyric feel like a prayer or a warning. It was the way he sang, not the musical notes he understood, that mattered. Songs like War Pigs, Crazy Train, Mr. Crowley, and Mama, I'm Coming Home endure not because of instrumental complexity, but because of the emotion Ozzy infused into every syllable. That's a kind of musicality no piano lesson can teach. Ironically, it was this very deficiency that made room for collaboration. Ozzy never tried to be a one-man band. He surrounded himself with gifted musicians and gave them space to create. He trusted them with the music, while they trusted him with the voice and the vision. That dynamic produced some of the most iconic sounds in metal history. In the twilight of his career, as he reflects on his journey from Birmingham's working-class neighborhoods to global superstardom, Ozzy remains unapologetic about his lack of instrumental skills. He laughs at it now, calling himself a lucky bastard who somehow made it without knowing what the hell he was doing. But fans and fellow musicians know the truth. He did know what he was doing, just not in the traditional sense. Ozzy Osbourne may not have held a guitar on stage or pounded a drum solo, but he wielded something far rarer, a voice that defined a generation and a soul that shaped a genre. His music wasn't born in technique, it was born in spirit. And that, in the end, is what made it unforgettable. By the late 1970s, Black Sabbath had been riding the storm of rock stardom for nearly a decade. But beneath the facade of success, the band was fraying at the seams. In 1978, they released Never Say Die, their 8th studio album, and what would become Ozzy Osbourne's final outing with the original lineup before his initial departure. Far from being a triumphant milestone, Never Say Die marked a sobering and disjointed end to an era, plagued by exhaustion, addiction, and creative burnout. The band had been deteriorating for years, consumed by the very lifestyle that their music so often echoed: chaos, rebellion, and self-destruction. Recording sessions for Never Say Die were a nightmare. Ozzy had briefly left the band before the album's production, replaced temporarily by ex-Savoy Brown vocalist Dave Walker. Though Ozzy returned, tensions were running high and communication was at an all-time low. The band no longer shared the camaraderie or unified vision that had defined their early albums. Musically, Never Say Die was a confusing departure from Black Sabbath's dark, heavy roots. The songs were stylistically scattered, experimenting with jazz influences, awkward synth elements, and more upbeat tones that baffled longtime fans. Tracks like Air Dance and Breakout ventured into unfamiliar territory, while even the title track, though energetic, lacked the raw, doom-laden power of Sabbath's earlier classics. The experimentation felt unfocused, like a band grasping for direction rather than pushing boundaries with purpose. Ozzy himself was physically and emotionally drained. His voice lacked the ferocious edge that had once defined it, and his enthusiasm for the band had all but evaporated. In interviews, he later admitted to feeling disconnected during the making of the album, unable to contribute in the way he once had. He was battling substance abuse, disillusionment, and a deepening sense of being creatively stifled. Black Sabbath had become a prison, and Never Say Die its final, bitter sentence. Critically, the album was met with disappointment. Reviewers noted its lack of cohesion and identity, calling it uninspired and half-baked. Commercially, it failed to reignite the spark of their former glory. Though it charted modestly, it paled in comparison to their groundbreaking earlier works like Paranoid and Master of Reality. Fans, too, were puzzled by the shift in tone and the evident wariness in the band's sound. The tour that followed the album's release only deepened the fractures. Internal conflicts escalated. Ozzy, increasingly unreliable, was eventually fired from the band in 1979, a decision that shocked the rock world but had become inevitable. For Ozzy, the failure of Never Say Die was both a personal and professional low point, but it also marked a turning point. From the ashes of that failed album, he would rise to forge an even more iconic solo career, though not without enduring more darkness and demons along the way. In hindsight, Never Say Die serves as a cautionary tale. It was not merely an underwhelming album, it was a sonic epitaph for the original Black Sabbath, a band brought down by fame, addiction, and misaligned visions. And for Ozzy Osbourne, it was the end of one chapter, but not the end of the story. Following the massive success of his first few solo efforts, including Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman, Ozzy Osbourne had firmly established himself as more than just the former frontman of Black Sabbath. He was a heavy metal icon in his own right. But by 1986, when The Ultimate Sin was released, the landscape of rock had shifted. Glam metal dominated the charts with bands like Mötley Crüe, Poison, and Bon Jovi. For Ozzy, this period was both an opportunity and a challenge to stay relevant without compromising the dark, chaotic persona that had defined his career. Produced by Ron Nevison and featuring guitarist Jake Ely, The Ultimate Sin was Ozzy's fourth solo album and a bold, glossier evolution of his sound. The album veered into slicker production values, radio-friendly hooks, and theatrical flair, embracing many of the glam metal tropes that saturated the mid-80s music scene. It was heavy, yes, but also colorful, polished, and strangely seductive. The title track, The Ultimate Sin, delivered a sharp, ominous energy, while Lightning Strikes and Never blended aggression with infectious melody. But it was the power ballad Shot in the Dark that became the album's standout hit. With its moody keyboard intro and instantly memorable chorus, the track soared on the charts and helped define Ozzy's commercial appeal to a wider MTV-watching audience. Ironically, while Ozzy reportedly never liked the song, it remains one of his most recognized. Lyrically, The Ultimate Sin explored familiar territory, internal torment, self-destruction, war, and the devils that lurk inside every man. But unlike the raw fury of earlier works, these themes were wrapped in a shiny, synthesized package, a calculated appeal to the era's commercial appetites. The visuals were equally theatrical. The album cover featured Ozzy, wild-eyed and monstrous, beside a demonic woman amid a fiery apocalypse. It was part camp, part nightmare, a perfect reflection of Ozzy's stage persona during the glam metal era. Despite its mixed critical reception, the album was a commercial success. It went platinum in the US and sold well internationally, securing Ozzy's place in the evolving metal scene of the 1980s. Yet, The Ultimate Sin has always had a complicated legacy. Some fans saw it as Ozzy selling out, leaning too hard into pop metal aesthetics and straying from the raw, heavy edge that made him famous. Others embraced it as a natural, if flamboyant, evolution in his artistry. Ozzy himself has expressed lukewarm feelings toward the album. In later interviews, he referred to it as his least favorite and even excluded songs from it in live performances for years. Part of this detachment stemmed from tensions behind the scenes. Guitarist Jake E. Lee, whose playing was central to the album's success, was dismissed shortly after the tour ended, a decision that shocked fans and further clouded the project's legacy. Still, The Ultimate Sin remains a unique chapter in Ozzy's discography. It captured a man caught between identities, the Prince of Darkness navigating a world of hairspray and neon lights. It was flashy but haunted, marketable but laced with genuine emotion and shadow. In many ways, it reflected Ozzy's ongoing struggle to balance fame with authenticity, to evolve without losing the essence of who he was. Looking back, The Ultimate Sin may not be as revered as Diary of a Madman or as groundbreaking as Blizzard of Oz, but it stands as a symbol of survival and adaptation. It proved that Ozzy Osbourne could weather yet another wave of musical change, and still command the spotlight with wicked charm and unmistakable power. When Black Sabbath announced their long-anticipated farewell tour, it should have been a triumphant closing chapter to one of the most legendary legacies in rock history. For decades, fans had dreamed of seeing the original lineup, Ozzy Osbourne, Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward, reunited for one final journey around the world. These four men had birthed heavy metal together, shaping the sound, the culture, and the mythos that defined an entire genre. A proper goodbye required all of them. But as the first dates of the end tour were confirmed, one absence loomed painfully large. Bill Ward, the original drummer, was not coming back. And for Ozzy Osbourne, this farewell, however grand it appeared on stage, was forever tinged with regret. The reasons behind Ward's exclusion were both public and deeply personal. Officially, disputes over contracts and health concerns were cited. Ward insisted he wasn't given a signable contract and expressed concern about how his contributions and worth were being valued. Ozzy, on the other hand, questioned Ward's physical readiness, suggesting that the rigorous touring schedule would have taken a toll on the aging drummer. What followed was a bitter public exchange of statements that exposed long-simmering tensions beneath the band's legacy. For fans, it was heartbreaking. The man whose thunderous, jazz-influenced drumming had powered classics like War Pigs and Iron Man was sidelined during the band's final curtain call. When the end tour began in 2016, the performances were undeniably powerful. Ozzy's vocals, rough but defiant, echoed across arenas with the same unhinged electricity that had captivated fans since the 1970s. Tony Iommi, battling cancer, delivered riffs with stoic brilliance. Geezer Butler's bass lines remained as heavy and ominous as ever. Behind the drums, Tommy Clufidus, a longtime member of Ozzy's solo band, did his best to replicate Ward's complex rhythms. But for all his talent, he wasn't Bill, and Ozzy knew it. Throughout the tour, even as pyrotechnics lit the sky and the crowds roared with nostalgia, there was a certain emotional vacancy that even the loudest amplifier couldn't cover. The chemistry between the original four was irreplaceable. Ward wasn't just a musician, he was a brother, a foundational part of Black Sabbath's soul. His absence wasn't merely technical, it was spiritual. Ozzy, though often irreverent in the press, later admitted that performing the farewell shows without Ward left him with a hollow feeling. The final concert, held on February 4, 2017 in their hometown of Birmingham, was meant to be sacred, a full-circle moment. But as Ozzy belted out the final notes of Paranoid, there was an undeniable sense that something was missing. The reunion was nearly complete, but not whole. Fans worldwide had hoped that Ward might walk on stage for just one last song, one last embrace, one last memory. But that moment never came. Ozzy smiled, waved, and bowed to the crowd, but behind those tired eyes was a quiet grief, one born not just from the end of a chapter, but from the way it ended. The farewell tour, for all its success and celebration, will always carry the ache of what could have been. And for Ozzy Osbourne, who had lived through so many broken friendships and lost years, this was another wound that never truly healed. In the years since, Ozzy has expressed a desire to reconcile with Ward. Though the logistics of a musical reunion may no longer be possible, the emotional need to make peace remains strong. After all, they were brothers once. And no stage, no matter how bright, can ever replace that kind of bond. As Ozzy continues his own journey toward retirement, the ghost of that final tour haunts him like a riff he can't shake. A final bow without Bill wasn't just a missed opportunity, it was a silent note in a lifetime of noise. As Ozzy Osbourne entered the new millennium, few could have predicted that the Prince of Darkness would transform into the unlikely king of reality television. In 2002, the Osbournes premiered on MTV, catapulting the metal legend and his eccentric household into the center of pop culture. For younger audiences unfamiliar with Black Sabbath or Ozzy's solo career, this chaotic, expletive-laced, wildly dysfunctional family show was their first introduction to the man behind the music. At its core, the Osbournes was supposed to be a raw, unscripted look into the daily lives of Ozzy, his wife Sharon, and their children Jack and Kelly. The premise was simple. Cameras followed the family around their Beverly Hills mansion as they navigated everything from pet problems to teenage rebellion to household disasters. But what emerged was far more surreal than anyone anticipated. The show's success was immediate and explosive. Viewers were captivated by the sheer absurdity of watching a heavy metal icon mumble his way through domestic life, struggle with a remote control, or yell at his misbehaving dogs with comical exasperation. Ozzy's rock god image was flipped on its head. Suddenly, he was the fumbling, baffled dad in slippers, constantly overwhelmed by the madness around him. For MTV, it was gold. For Ozzy, it was something else entirely. Beneath the humor and viral soundbites was a far more troubling reality. Ozzy was still battling addiction during much of the show's run, often heavily medicated and disoriented. The world laughed as he shuffled through the hallways, but many didn't realize they were watching a man struggling with painkillers and the lingering effects of years of drug abuse. What seemed like comedic confusion was often the result of a cocktail of prescription medications, something Ozzy himself would later admit with deep regret. Sharon, ever the fierce matriarch, held the family together, even while dealing with her own cancer diagnosis during the show's second season. Jack and Kelly, thrown into the limelight at tender ages, were suddenly subjected to a level of fame they never sought. Both would later battle substance abuse, their young lives unraveling under the harsh scrutiny of fame. What began as a peek behind the curtain quickly became a cautionary tale of overexposure. Ozzy, in particular, found the experience deeply disorienting. In interviews years later, he would confess that he often couldn't remember much of the filming due to his medication use. The very show that reintroduced him to a new generation of fans had, in many ways, made him feel more lost than ever. The cameras were always on. There was no reprieve, no sanctuary. His home had become a set, his life a performance, and his confusion a form of entertainment. Yet, there was something undeniably human beneath all the dysfunction. Audiences connected with the Osbournes not because they were perfect, but because they were unapologetically flawed. There was love amid the chaos, laughter in the mess, and vulnerability behind the fame. For Ozzy, who had spent much of his career hiding behind persona and performance, the show peeled back the layers and revealed a weary, bewildered, but deeply loving man. The Osbournes ended in 2005 after 4 seasons. Its impact, however, It changed the trajectory of celebrity culture, ushering in a wave of reality TV families and giving birth to a new genre where the lines between private and public lives blurred dangerously. And for Ozzy, it marked a turning point, not in his music, but in his identity. In the aftermath, he expressed both pride and regret. Pride in his family's ability to connect with the world, to show resilience through cancer battles and addiction recoveries. But regret, too, for the moments lost to the lens, the privacy sacrificed, and the cost it inflicted on those he loved most. Looking back, The Osbournes was both a renaissance and a reckoning. It brought Ozzy to a new peak of fame, but it also stripped him bare, exposing wounds that had never truly healed. It made him a household name all over again. But this time, not for his music, but for his messiness. And perhaps that's the strange duality of Ozzy Osbourne. The man who howled on stage with bats and blood also became the mumbling dad who couldn't work the TV. The rock legend who defied death more times than anyone could count also became a symbol of bizarre domestic hilarity. And through it all, through the noise, the pills, the cameras, the pain, Ozzy remained what he always was, unfiltered, unbreakable, and undeniably real.